Hello, and welcome to the Green Team of the Legendarium, the weird little spin-off podcast where patrons of the Legendarium get together and talk about the books and topics the main crew haven't gotten around to yet. I'm Seeker, and today I have with me Jingles90.
Hola.
Today we are covering War God's Own, Part 2, or Book 2, of the Hradani or War God series by David Weber. So, Jingles, general impressions.
General impressions, I think I really enjoyed I think I enjoyed this book a little bit more than the first one. And I think I enjoyed it because of I felt like we had a little bit more purpose this time around. And I think we can get into a couple more details there later. But a lot of my concerns about everything just kind of wandering and being like sequences of events that this happens and then this happens and then this happens. That all kind of disappeared with this book.
All right, yeah, I was going to ask about that, how it compared to book one in your reading.
Yeah.
I've been pondering, and I think this is probably my favorite of the War God books.
Okay.
Not that I dislike any of the others, but I think we don't really see characters like Sir Vijon of Almerhands after this, and I really like his character evolution, and we'll get to him in a minute.
Yep.
And we don't really see much of the Hradani community in general after this book.
Right.
And I really enjoy that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned, I obviously have not read past this one just yet, but the lack of both of those things feel like they would be a kind of a hit to the series overall. Understood why they maybe go that route. Why Weber chooses to do that. But yeah, Vijon, I think, is one of my favorite characters of this series so far, if not my favorite character. So
yeah, and we'll get into that when we cover him specifically.
Sure.
What do you think? What do you think of the pacing of this book as it compares to the other one? Just, the mixture of adventure with mystery, with action, with time spent in any particular location.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty good overall. Like I've never found myself bored with either of these books. So, going from place to place is not necessarily a problem when I know that there's a goal at the end of all of it, because that's just questing, right?
Right.
So, in some regards, it's not that different from the first one in that respect, pacing wise. But just knowing that there is like an end game in sight is helpful for me.
Yeah, that would be. Knowing that they're trying to achieve something and at least a vague idea of what that is.
Right. And the world building in this is pretty phenomenal. Like I love that we get to see like the dwarf cities. Like those are some of my favorite parts. Like Weber just does an amazing job describing those cities and things like that. And even seeing like how some people how some of the Hradani see what Basil's doing, how they react to that, how the different paladin orders, the Order of Tomanak, how they react to different things, seeing the cultural changes as you go into each region feel very well thought out and built. So
yeah, and I love how, this isn't really a spoiler, so I'll include it. I love how the dwarf culture is presented as an evolving culture rather than your stereotype fantasy where the dwarves act this way, the elves act this way. He provides enough world building so things haven't always been that way. Not all dwarves agree, etc.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's kind of a nice thing about all of the cultures in this book is there's a lot of things that are steeped in tradition, but the tradition is constantly being questioned as to why it's there in the first place. And we're seeing, Basil is kind of a character that is an avatar for all of that kind of idea.
Yeah,
Because
definitely. He's
so
like the primary questioner of everything.
yeah, so and I think we see it in the dwarves as well. So
All right. Shall we do our I never remember the word you know.
our synopsis.
Yeah,
Let's
our
go for it.
synopsis, thank you.
Yeah. Basil Bannickson's journeys continue. Last seen on a halfling ship, Basil and Brandark have traveled to Beladan, where they meet the Order of Tomanak and a little prejudiced man named Vijan. After Vijan's severe beating by Basil, because let's face it, there's no way a Hradani could be a champion of Tomanak, the god himself shows up and tells everyone that what Basil has claimed is true. He then also appoints Vijan and as Basil's squire. Aware that Sharna is manipulating the bloody swords in the shadows, Basil decides to return to Hergrum to warn his father. Along the way, the team meets another champion of Tomanak, a woman named Caritha. They also face raiders, run into Wizard Wensit, learn the history of the 5 races of man and what makes Hradani so special, and fight off Sharna's followers. Basil also decides to swear in an entire chapter of Hradani to the Order of Tomanak. Basil's final challenge is to prevent the human Sathoi from invading and raiding Hergrum, while his father takes an army to face the Bloody Swords. After an initial sloppy attack by the Sathoi, Basil speaks to the Baron of the Sathoi lands, and they agree that Basil will join him to inform the Sathoi king that the Baron has surrendered to Basil. Carrie joins him on his journey, and Vijan is left to organize the new chapter of the Order.
Mm-hmm.
It's a busy book.
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually have some interesting thoughts on the Sathoi when we get to them. Yeah, say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, right. The names in this, they're so I love his names. Like, why are
Oh yeah.
we being so complicated with spelling out Basil?
Well, at least he doesn't include all the weird hyphens and accents and everything that is in some fantasy.
That's true. Yeah, and then
You
he
know, it's
does
just
also.
really, really odd spellings, but
Yeah,
okay, at least they're pronounceable,
they're pronounceable. I at
mostly.
least kind of understand what that word is. Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
So okay, so Bazel and Brandark arrive, and they meet Bijon. That is probably my favorite scene in the entire
it's a great starter. I mean,
book.
it's a
And it really addresses some basic human foibles, such as making assumptions and not really listening, you know, and judging people by appearance, and you know, a couple of threadbare Hradani that look like mercenary bums basically show up, and he's there looking for an ambassador of God, and
yeah,
he's just automatically dismisses them as a nuisance or in the way.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and it just and he even when the evidence is all there, he still just
Hmm.
denies it just because there's no way you could ever have
Right.
someone who's not human be a paladin. No way at all. And I love that he gets to pay for that,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
misplaced assumption. Um, and let's face it, he's a bit of a spoiled brat too, because he has all the fineries and things. So
Of course.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, and that honestly, it's pointed out in the book, which I like, that it's not really his fault, because of the way he was raised to take such pride in his lineage and in his station. He's completely oblivious to the fact that in a divine order, that doesn't mean anything.
right.
And he no matter how much his elders in the church or religion have tried to tell him, he's just not getting it.
Yeah. Just gotta figure all the way to the point where he wants to duel Hradani because he thinks that Tomanak will protect him.
Right,
Uh,
because of course
just
he's right.
because of course he's right.
You
How could
know.
he be wrong?
Yeah.
He's yeah. I do love this kind of depiction of closing off evidence to support your belief, and maybe
Oh
a
yeah.
misplacement of belief in.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just very good.
It's wonderful when God can actually show up.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my next point. And then we also have a god that chooses to interact with its people and
Right.
doesn't doesn't leave anything for doubt. I mean, I love that Tomanak's just like, yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, I let him do his thing because he needed to prove to you on his own, but
Right.
clearly that's still not getting through your thick skull. So here I am, and now listen.
But I love how the God interaction is balanced with personal choice.
Hmm.
We see this at one point when he shows up later on, and at the end he just says, "Oh, and in response to that question, you're not asking me, Carrie. Yes, you are where you're supposed to be and doing
Yeah,
what you're supposed to be doing." And he leaves, and her response is, "Great. Now, if only I knew what I was
I
supposed to
was,
be doing."
yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Good.
You know, but it's like he's not infantilizing his champions by holding them by the hand and leading them through. He's letting them explore, but when they need it, he steps in or offers a bit of guidance or encouragement, when needed.
Right. Well, I think in Tomanak we see a depiction of like what Weber believes in this world is an ideal leader, and at some point his paladins also have to have that instilled in them. So,
Hmm.
um we're always seeing Tomanak let people make a decision before he is a last resort, right? Like
Right.
I don't want to call them equals because I definitely think he is driving them in certain ways that maybe they're not attuned to. But at the same time,
Hmm.
he treats them like equals when he speaks to them. Like Basil is allowed to be a sarcastic butthead with
Right.
Tomanak, and Tomanak doesn't hate that. In fact, he like jokes
He
around
seems
with
to
him
enjoy
too.
it. Yes.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic that I think Weber is pulling off really well.
Hmm.
Um,
And speaking of styles of leadership, the elder, head of the order, who allowed his fondness for Vijon to get in the way of delivering him the swift kick in the pants that he so desperately needed. Um, it's like he's showing the flaws of a leader who is too caring and too gentle with his followers, or in a religious sense, with his flock. It's like
right.
sometimes people need a whack between the eyes with a 2x4 just to, you know, make them uncross their eyes and look beyond their nose.
Right. So,
But yeah, it is interesting. I hadn't thought of that, the various leadership examples in the book, and yes, there are many more coming up.
mhm. Yeah, I think we're
So
gonna see plenty. I, you know, don't want to jump too far ahead, but even the Baron of Sithoi, like, very clearly has some patriotism for his lands, and he understands that
mhm,
he does have to fight the Hradani invaders. But once he realizes the whole state of the entire situation, he understands that it's unjust for him to do what he could do, which is just wipe them
mhm,
out. Um,
right.
and finds a way to
Which
work
he
around that.
personally never
So,
wanted to do, anyways.
right. But, when war starts and you're on one side, how often do
Yeah,
you get to make a decision, right? Um, it's tough. I mean, this is very much.
yeah, which is very realistic about war.
Yeah, and I think, this is very much an idealistic version of how you can work out perhaps a war scenario. Like, I don't think this is something that would necessarily fly in real life, but we're reading fantasy that has a little bit of philosophy tapped in. So it's fun to watch.
Right. Yes. Yeah. What do you think of Karitha and her general general depiction as the only lead female in the book, and just general character growth in this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think. most of the character growth. Well, okay. I'm going to be perfectly honest. It's been about 3 months since I last read this book. So I'm having some memory issues. But
For everybody listening, we recorded this about almost 2 months ago now, and I somehow lost the audio files, so we are having to
it's
go over it
okay.
again.
Yeah, we can jump into round two easy. But,
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest, I don't remember Caritha's arc too much. I remember her story that she tells Basil about how she became a paladin, and I kind of
Mhm.
see what she has done with him since then. And I like the dynamic. I think they've got a
Mhm.
really good thing going on. Um, and I really like, the idea of that she just needs to trust that she is going in the right direction to continue her quest, which is kind of to bring
Mhm. What
justice to
what
everyone.
what stood out to me most in her arc is when she says that she realized that what she wanted wasn't justice but vengeance against the men who had hurt her,
Hmm.
and not just those men, any man would do.
Right.
And this struck me as actually a very good example of how, um, I don't want to say ethnic tribalism because that's not always the case, but humans have this habit of choosing a person who, or group of people who hurt them, and then applying that to an entire larger group, shall we say. It could be
Sure.
religious, it could be racial, it could be tribal, it could be, who knows, a language group. A guy with a funny accent robs you at gunpoint. From then on, everybody with that accent is an enemy. You know,
Right.
and it's a thing. It's part of our danger recognition system that has
Yeah. It's
become
a
less
trauma
useful
response.
in the modern era.
Right.
Yeah. And I,
Um,
I just found the way
yeah.
she had to deal with that to be very interesting.
Yeah. And I think that coming out the other side of that is a sign of healing for her. So
Hmm.
seeing where she gets to go next, we'll see if that's actually true.
And I'm not going to say
But
anything.
yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed all that. I did enjoy I will let's go back to the dwarves a little bit because I
Uh huh.
do think, like I said, this was some of my these were some of my favorite parts in the books. When they go to Dorvenholm, is that the
Hmm.
name of the city?
Either
Yeah, when they
Dwarven
go to
Home or
Dorvenholm,
Dwarvenheim, whatever it is.
Dorvenheim, yeah. Um, when they go to the city and they start like examining the space, Weber does some amazing work of describing like the intricacies um of the caverns and the
Yes,
construction that's taken to create this place. But it also acknowledges the fact that they're all underground and so like there's just garbage piles everywhere. Like they did take a little bit of a hit in trying to they have some things they still need to work out cynically.
but the garbage piles are converted into parks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
They have plenty that they need to do from a civil engineering point to get fixed up.
And what I found nice about Weber's description is he doesn't go overboard on them. I never felt like I was getting info dumped with the paint, the paint patterns on the walls or some. He doesn't go into minute detail. He paints broad strokes with his depictions, so you
Yeah.
get the feel and you can imagine it in your mind. But he lets you fill in the details as the reader.
Yeah. And it is a magical thing because I don't think honestly like a lot of the rest of the book, I don't think I could tell you what anywhere else looks like. Um Now
No,
we're
he really
dealing with a
doesn't
lot
do
of just
that with
powder.
the Hradani lands.
No. We know that they're kind of more tribal. They have like a lot of
Uh-huh.
huts
The
and
throne room
things,
gets
but
some description, which kind of reminds me of a Viking hall, but it's
right,
also that's part of a larger building, which would make it not a Viking hall. So,
right. So who knows? But yeah, I think yeah, his dedication to describing the Dwarvenheim was really cool.
on a well, to use Craig's or whoever it is levels of description, one L2 level 2 thing that I noticed in with the dwarves that has stuck with me is they're talking about the stereotype of dwarves being greedy and grasping, and it's
Mm,
brought out that, well, yes and no. Dwarves do compete in wealth with each with to gather wealth, but what they're actually doing is they're competing with other dwarves for social status within the tribes, and
right,
because they don't compare themselves to the greater world or to humans, then it looks to humans that they're just greedy and grasping, when what humans might consider to be a wealthy dwarf would actually be considered middle class or poor by local dwarven standards.
right.
And I've had similar discussions when discussing, global poverty versus U.S. poverty and things like that, and it just kind of stood out with me as an interesting parallel for how humans how humans think of wealth. We never compare
Mhm.
ourselves to people who are too high above us or too far below us. We compare ourselves to people that are within the range of where we think we might achieve or how far we might fall.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that definitely causes an imbalance in our perspective, right?
Oh yeah,
Be-
yeah, and I'm not even going to touch the sociology on that one because it's
yeah. Yeah. It's probably
highly
not
debated. Let's put it that
suited to us.
way.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so that's it's great when they go through Dwarvenhain, they cut off, they get to bypass the snowed-in passes. So
Yep.
I mean, it is an interesting. I don't know if it was a nod to the Two Towers or no. No, it's the Fellowship
It's
with
fellowship, yeah.
going through Casa Doom rather than going over the snowed-in passes.
Right.
But at least we didn't have to face a Balrog in this one.
Right. Well, yeah, these dwarves haven't dug too deep, right?
Yes,
They're
exactly.
still up
They
there.
haven't discovered the Mithril mines yet.
No. And they're also they're not as hard-headed. I feel like yeah, in Lord of the Rings, a lot of our dwarves are pretty they've got their own
Yeah,
prejudices
especially in The
themselves.
Hobbit, they're very bullheaded.
They're very bullheaded. Whereas with these guys, they're like, when you're ready for us, call. We're
Hmm.
ready. Tell your father. We're ready to go whenever you are.
Right.
Um,
And
ready to
and
join the
they
cause.
even offer to supply them with weaponry if they promise to use them to fight Sharna.
Yep.
Because Sharna defiles the underground areas, and they're the god of the dwarves is a god of rocks and stuff.
Yeah. Ruins the sanctity of their place.
Yep.
But yeah, they do great. I love the dwarves in this world. They're so cool.
They
and
are
they're
good.
and
I
they're
do
not
wish we had
idiots
more
either.
of
They've
them, but
got yeah. And they're not idiots either. I mean, they've got houses full of books and they're all out there studying and educating themselves and
oh yeah.
um I guess which is probably true of the dwarves in Lord of the Rings and elsewhere, but it does stand
Well,
out here.
there's I don't know why, but for some reason in fantasy, especially if the audiobook is read by a Brit, all the dwarves are mountain Scottish or Scottish Highlanders,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
with the typical uneducated stereotype, and it gets tedious after a while.
Sure.
It's like, can you think of a new accent for a dwarf besides Highland Scotland, please? They're
Yeah.
supposed to live under the mountains, not on top of them.
On top of them. Yeah. Do we know, was there ever any intention on Tolkien's part to make them regionally distinct? Or is that
Not that
just
I'm
something
aware
that
of.
we've Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's
Uh,
something that's just kind of crept in over time.
sure.
But yeah,
Makes sense.
the elves are Irish and the dwarves are Scottish.
Right.
Okay, well the next do you have anything for the scene when he recruits the order? Any particular?
Oh yeah, that scene was awesome. That was our another situation where we had Tomanak just show up. um
Yeah, well, he shows up
because
twice in with the Hradani. Once after the
yeah.
raid and once after. Oh yeah, we almost no. Yeah, we almost skipped the raid because the raid happens first and
Oh yeah,
then Tomanak
right happens first.
um no, well, does it? No, they swear oath first, then they go after it, and then
Then they
there's
go to the
the
raid.
big meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of an interesting thing is Sharna, if Sharna's the main kind of overarching villain of this whole series, not doing very good. I mean
I can
that
tell
raid
you she's
was
not.
destructive.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
this defeat weakens her greatly. But don't forget,
Yeah.
there's like eight
Okay.
of the evil gods, so
Yeah, I was looking at the 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 pages about just um the Pantheon folks
mhm.
is huge. It's like
Yeah.
20 pages on its own.
Oh wow.
But yeah. At least in my copies, and I'm doing the paperbacks. But
Yeah. No, that
um
makes sense. I just had never really thought of it.
yeah. But I did like, Brandark is an interesting character too, just because of his bloody sword attachment. Um
And his
the
kind of his weird loyalty, non-loyalty to any particular god.
Yeah.
He wants to be a
Yeah,
bard,
he's
but he's
got
not a bard. He would serve Tomanak, but he just knows it's not the right god for him. Nothing against him, just doesn't fit me.
right. Well, and the only reason he's not a bard though, so that's kind of an interesting thing too. He's he loves his art, but the only reason he's not a bard per se is because the god acknowledges that he's not very good.
Yes,
Right?
he not only doesn't
Like
have the voice for it, he doesn't have the skill at rhyme. He can write doggerel,
yeah,
but not verse. Or I guess they say he
yeah.
can write prose, but not poetry.
Sure. But he's still acknowledged by her. She still loves him all the same. It's very nice.
Yes, yes,
Um
yeah. They
but okay,
respect him,
but
even
yeah,
though.
so yeah. But yeah, so the bloody swords, um, listening to that crowd come up with reasons why Basil was lying, and then having Tomanak show up and just once again be like, "Stop questioning
Mhm.
what he's saying, please."
Well,
Like
what's so
it's
great
true.
about it?
It's all
It's
true.
it's your typical intractable political issue. I don't care
Mhm.
what your particular, you know, intractable thing that you argue with people about. Put it right there, and it's perfect. It's like it doesn't matter what one comes up with; the other one's coming up with a reason why it could be wrong. And the guy
Right.
just shows up and's like, "Yeah, we're done here. This could have lasted a week."
Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to bother with this nonsense because it is true. Why hide the evidence of it? And then actually being like, listen, the only reason I never did anything with the Hradani in the past was a mistake of my own making. Y'all were kind of barbarians. Wasn't a huge fan of that, but then I also was busy fighting off my family. So I didn't make an effort until this point when I desperately needed one of you. Um,
Well,
and
that
then kind of
and
throwing in like,
he says that because of the trauma that they suffered at the hand of the sorcerers, they were too angry, and
yeah, they
therefore
were
they
inaccessible.
couldn't hear God, if you will, because they weren't in a
Mhm.
position to listen. And so they had to wait
Right.
until they had developed to a certain level where they were even willing enough to so that he could appear. It's almost as if their anger would have blocked him from even showing up.
Right.
That's
Well,
the
and
impression I
the
get.
only reason, yeah, and I think the only reason that he even acknowledges Basil in the first place is because Basil starts um, going against that trend, right?
Yes, yes,
He starts
absolutely.
making
He definitely makes the
moral
first
decisions.
move.
He makes moral decisions that are not expected of Hradani,
Hmm.
um, which is kind of an interesting aspect considering that his family is really freaking nice.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a combination of two things. I think that there was the him and his personality, which you're right, he shares with his family, but also his um, his personal dedication and um, his willingness to do the right thing because he believes it's the right thing, regardless of what other people say,
Right.
and then to be tested as extremely as he was tested. I do believe that the opening scene of the first book was basically like his final test. When he goes up against the
Okay.
prince to rescue the maiden slave girl or whatever she was.
Right.
Because if
Yeah,
just
that
being
makes
nice
sense to
was
me.
enough, yeah, Tomanek could have recruited anyone from his family.
Yeah. And I mean, he kind of does at this point. Like, we get a whole chapter created
Well, he does
in
get about half of his
less
cousins
than
and
a couple days. Yeah, yeah. And the hard line on whether they become part of the order or not really seems to come down to whether they want to follow Basil or follow his dad, both understanding that those are both equally good decisions.
hmm
So,
but different, which I like. It doesn't try to make it seem like becoming a member of a religious order is somehow more moral than serving the a good secular government, shall we say?
yeah, 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 makes sense. So,
Uh,
but yeah, I love that. The raid scene was not very long, but epic. A lot of the fight scenes, and I really like most of the fight scenes in this book,
mhm.
including the thieves in the pass. It was
And
a
he,
really good
yeah, those
fight
are good
scene.
too. And he doesn't over choreograph. That's one
No,
thing I like
it's a
about
lot
Weber's
of
writing.
yeah. And then what was the other? And then the fight scene at the end, of course, is really good.
Mhm. But the one thing I noticed just recently about the Sithoi Windrunners is he basically took a horse archer culture like the Mongols or the Huns, or the Goths or whatever, or the Turks, etc. Anyone who came from that part of the world, but he didn't make them
Sure.
Asian. He made them European.
Mm,
So they're
okay.
acting like they came from the what in England were called the Marcher Lords, which were basically border wardens between England and Wales and England and Scotland. Very independent style. Every lord had his own castle. They had independent armies and caused a lot of problems
Sure.
during the Wars of the Roses.
Of course.
but
Sounds like they would.
but they're not longbow infantrymen. They're horse archers with all of the love of horses and horse traditions that kind of culture would have.
Yeah.
The only thing he didn't include is the nomadicness you know of the steppe tribes.
Yeah, they're pretty established as they have a realm that they're monitoring.
Hmm. Their
They're
horses
the
go and
south
they move
side.
around, but they're all kept. They're treated more like herds of goats or sheep would, rather than the wild horses of the steppe plains.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. And I think too you get some. I'm trying to remember. Are they even on horses when they do the first battle? They're not, right?
No,
Because they have
because
to
they
go
have
through
to
that
dismount
pass.
to go through to climb down the pass. So, and that's a big part
Yeah.
in the first battle. And one of the reasons the Hradani are able to hold out is that they're horse archers fighting on foot with spears, and they're not trained for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas the
Oh, that was
Hradani are
brutal.
classic heavy infantry.
Yeah. Which, yeah, they were totally suited for that battle.
Mm-hmm.
That was such a good. I love Basil goes up to him and is like, "Listen, there's no way you get through on the first wave. Can we just put this at ease? You're trying to take advantage of a weakened state. We're not going to let you do that. This is totally within the realm of justice that we're allowed to serve.
Right.
Just step
And if you
away."
wipe us out,
The
you're
guy's
going to
like, "No,
have
I'm not
the
going
rest
to."
of the order after you.
Yeah. Yep.
You know,
And the other guy's like,
and
"Nope,
the
I'm not
king's
doing
brother
it."
just happens to be a member. It's like,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But yeah, and then just watching the absolute slaughter that happens is like, yeah, this is exactly. I mean, Basil's a great strategist and tactician,
oh
and
yeah.
he understands exactly his scenarios. Um, and so, I mean, I guess sure we can chalk up some of this to dramatic irony, but it's like listening to him as a reader, yeah, this isn't gonna go great.
Mhm.
It's gonna
No,
be
that
miserable.
is one thing that's really nice when you're reading a book written by someone who has had training in military tactics. It's like they
Mhm.
know how to write them.
Yes, yes, they do, and you can often tell
Yes.
when someone has put in the time to
Yeah.
think about
I
it.
think I mentioned in the last podcast most new readers to Weber can't believe he was never in the military.
Yeah. He did a lot of military reading, though.
Oh yeah. Military historian. Yeah, he doesn't do it in this book, but I'll be anxious if we ever get to a book where he's quoting Clausewitz or Sun Tzu or some of the classics like that.
Sure. It's gonna appear in one way or another.
Uh-huh. I mean, it shows up here, but he's not directly quoting. He's paraphrasing different things.
Right,
Because obviously that would be
right.
anachronistic.
And just bizarre.
Yeah,
I
yeah. Can
think
you
the only
imagine,
person I feel like get away
Winston of
with it.
Rune quoting Sun Tzu or something?
Right. Well, Winsett might be the only person that I'd kind of believe could do that if he has like because he's kind of a Merlin style wizard, He could have
Well, yeah,
traveled
but I
in
mean,
some way and gotten that information.
to cross over to a different universe, even when Hoyd does it, it hits me wrong.
Sure.
I mean, he's talking about, anachronistic animals or whatever that he supposedly saw in a different world, and I'm just going, which one? It's like where is that on any of
Right.
the Cosmere planets? You know.
Why does this one look so advanced? And what the heck why would it even make sense?
Yeah.
Especially the Cosmere, where you have every planet is so specific
Hmm.
in its development.
Yeah. And none of them have developed or have been noted to have either animals or cultures or technology that would lead to the development of some of the words Hoyd throws around. So, all right. So before we go, let's. You got anything specific about the battle, the Sathoi, or any other? Um, oh yeah, one thing we in the last book you predicted that you predicted that Winsett of Rune was probably might be neutral, might be nefarious. How would you rank him on
Yeah.
the good, evil, nefarious scale now? or rather helpful to nefarious. Let's
This
put
is
it that
how
way.
this is how this is how Weber gets you, because he made him useful in this one, very useful.
Yes, extremely.
Um, I'm neutral on Winston. Yeah, I'm neutral on Winston at this point. Like I said, he's kind of a he's a Merlin Gandalf guy. Like he's a wizard out here doing wizardy things, and you see him sometimes, and he'll help you if he can, and other times he'll just disappear.
Hmm.
So
Yes, very much, and a lot like
I
early
like
Hoyd when
Winston.
we had no idea if he was actually good or bad. Well, frankly, I still don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I think from a certain point of view, he's both,
Well, yes.
right?
Well, yeah. We'll leave Obi-Wan Kenobi out of this. Thank you very much.
I just really like Winsett. I'm interested to see the bigger role he plays in this series, because so far he's been a lot of our world building exposition from like the more cosmics. Well, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but yeah, like cosmic scale. Like he's actually explained to us how the five races of man came to being and why they are the way they are, and why their traits are identified certain ways according to the magic systems, which is interesting because this is not like a hard magic system, for lack of a better word. Like this is
No,
very
it's
much a
not.
soft magic system as far as I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's
So
interesting. It's almost like a
um
Shanora branching of the races.
yeah,
Yeah, which makes it more, in
kind of
my
had a
opinion, makes it more interesting than each race created separately, the way Tolkien described it. It's like, no, you're all just people.
right.
Yeah,
you all just have weird attunements
to the magical
to
field.
the magic
Yeah,
system. That's all it is. Yeah. So, but yeah, I like Winsett.
I really liked in the politics that lead up to the final confrontation how you've got these people who, even the worst bad guy isn't actually bad. In his mind, he's avenging his father for wrongs
No.
done. He's avenging his people for wrongs done. And he thinks that making peace would be a betrayal of all the spilled blood. And even
Hmm.
when Winsett shows up and tells them, you know, this is the true version of how your conflict started, both sides are kind of like, actually, that doesn't actually really matter because we've had so many years of killing each other. The original cause doesn't really matter anymore. It was just the story we told ourselves to feel better about what we were doing. You
Yeah,
know,
we were looking for ways to motivate our
mm-hmm.
war.
And you can see that in. I mean, I don't know this history super well, but like during World War I, the Turks killed off massive ethnic groups that they thought might turn against them, and then now those ethnic groups
Right.
hate the Turks, and if they ever have the power, you know, well, we saw an example in the former Yugoslavia what might happen, you know,
Yeah.
and it's not based on any particular rationality other than we've been doing this to each other for hundreds of years, and now we can do it to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not pretty, but it's very human.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it can be frustrating, right? Like it's frustrating to hear those types of things even when you have a primary source that can definitively tell you what
Yeah.
happened, and you just have kind of given up on that point once you even after you understand it.
Hmm. But you didn't
So,
really realize you'd given up on it till it's pointed out, and then it's like, oh yeah, well, whatever. He killed my uncle. He must
yeah.
die.
Yeah. Everything deteriorated long ago. I'm just moving through the
Now it's
motions.
just momentum.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, which is something, unfortunately, even in this age of what was the political theory? Two countries with McDonald's will never go to war against each other. And
Yeah,
it's like,
not so much.
yeah, that theory's been shot to hell.
Yeah, it has.
But, all right. So, on a scale of 5, how would you rate this book?
Let me tell you. I think I put it at a 3, 5, or 4. Yeah, do a 3, 5.
Uh-huh. Well, this one for me, as I said, is my favorite probably, so I'm going to give it another 5. On Goodreads, it's
Sure.
4.1, which is highly respectable with 4,700 reviews.
Pretty high.
Yeah. And on Amazon with 1,100, it's a 4.6.
Also, very high.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
We will continue to explore this world. Now, let me pull the text back up. That concludes our episode. You can find us on the Legendarium's Discord. The invite link is on legendarium.com. Join us in supporting the Legendarium via Patreon. Thanks to Professor Greg for loaning us a little corner of your media empire. Shout out to Horizon Brave for starting it all. Thank you once again for joining me, Jingles. And I'm Seeker. Until next time, bye. Music is Galactic Damages by Jingle
Adios.
Punk.